West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théères, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
We begin with the disturbing, violent rhetoric that's surging on the far right about a, quote, civil war. The New York Times reporting talk of civil war ignited by the Mar-a-Lago search is flaring online. That search happened on August 8th, just hours after Trump made the search public. Mentions of civil war on Twitter spiked a whopping 3,000%. The Times says similar spikes happened on Facebook, Reddit, Telegram, Parler, Gab, and Truth Social. And of course, some Trump allies are fanning the flames. At a campaign event for an election denier in Arizona, former Trump official Michael Flynn openly talked about governors declaring war.
States' rights. Did you know that a governor can declare war? Governor can declare war. Okay? And we're going to probably see that.
That comes after Q Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene said this at a Trump rally in Michigan.
I'm not going to mince words with you all. Democrats want Republicans dead, and they've already started the killings.
Yet when President Biden gave a speech describing the, quote, semi-fascism in the MAGA movement, Trump allies claimed he was being unfair.
He looked like he was in the depths of hell. He was talking about how half the country are basically domestic terrorists.
But watch how conservatives embraced that description at the right-wing CPAC summit just a month earlier.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are all domestic terrorists.
Joining me now is Rick Wilson, Lincoln Project co-founder, and Christina Greer, political science professor with Fordham University. My thanks to both of you for getting our show kicked off. Rick, I'm going to start with you. The GOP saw that violence didn't work out so well for them on January 6th. So why aren't they disavowing this kind of rhetoric? Are there no sane adults left in the room?
No, the party that was the Republican Party that I grew up in has completely abandoned any sort of pretense of ideology now, and it is only about the retention of power. They'll get there however they have to. And the promotion of violence and the double standard about violence is one that they, you see every GOP campaign is running ads about crime and the threat of violent crime. Well, we've got a party that proved that they would use violence to attempt to overthrow an election. It is wired into the party now because it's one area where authoritarians have always discovered they can exercise power is violence and the fear of violence. This is going to accelerate. We're not at the end of that cycle after 1/6. We're at the very beginning.
You know, Christina, what worries you the most, putting aside, the obvious threat of violence with this type of language, threats of an impending civil war? To Rick's point, even lab rats, they learn from their mistakes. Is there a valid concern that in something, for example, as small as a local race, a local election, we could see violence?
Katie, I think it boils down to your initial question was, are there any sane adults left in the room? The reason why this is so frightening is because it's no longer just a very small, obscure faction of the Republican Party. These are real leaders. These are elected officials. These are members of Congress. This is the former president himself inciting this type of violence. So we can't just say, oh, this is a fringe movement of the Republican Party. It's not really what the party believes. And what's really frightening, Katie, is the silence of so many Republican leaders when we hear this type of rhetoric, when Republican leaders are saying, strap up, get ready, when they're not denouncing people coming in, trying to kidnap Governor Gretchen Whitmer from Michigan, when we see them armed to the teeth all the time. We're not seeing sane Republican leaders condemning this in the most serious ways. And they're just either complicit, they're silent, or they're actually encouraging it, which is really dangerous, just as Rick said, as we get closer to November 2022, and definitely as we get closer to November 2024.
And Christina, staying with you, a poll showing that 54% of Republicans, 54%, see a civil war likely in the next decade. Is that why the leaders of the party are just checking out and saying, if the numbers are that high, you know what, we might as well deliver what the popular vote wants?
Yeah, I think that's part of it, Katie. I mean, I think so many of them just want to stay in office. They recognize that their primaries are really where all the action is. And so they're looking out for themselves and not country. But this reminds me of LBJ and, my favorite president. And this is a paraphrase of a quote. But he said, if you can convince the poorest white man that he's better than the Negro, then you can pick his pockets all day long. And the Republican Party is trying to convince so many members of their party that, they don't have, because it's the immigrants, it's the Muslims, it's the blacks, it's the Asians, it's all these other groups that are taking from them, which is absolutely not true. They're not telling their constituents that the reason why their homes have been destroyed is because they voted against climate change protections, that they voted against the federal government coming in to protect people who have been destroyed, whose lives have been destroyed by hurricanes. They're not doing any of that. They're saying, your life is bad because Democrats are racist and they hate you. Make this make sense. But somehow they believe if they say it enough, their constituents believe them.
And, Rick, election workers are increasing security around polling places before the midterms. Is this the new reality in America now, where we're going to have armed guards for people to go and exercise their right to vote?
I think we may end up in that position at some point. There is an increasing movement on the far right to intimidate voters. Whether it's on the legal side in the beginning by raising the standards and by eliminating, drop boxes, eliminating early voting, eliminating absentee ballot permissions, and they're going to end up with the big MAGA guys from Meal Team 6 strapped up, just standing just outside that line in a lot of polling places to intimidate people. This is going to be part of a portfolio of actions that I believe will become increasingly common on the right. And believe me, when you have people who are from vulnerable communities who see a bunch of tooled up, heavily armed, guys in their cosplay camo outside a polling place, they're going to say, "Do I really want to get out of the car? Who knows what these guys are going to do?" And there was a huge fake panic back during the second Obama election where two Black Panthers were outside a polling place in Pennsylvania, and the far right lost its damn mind for weeks on end on Fox News. You're going to see this iterate out much further. The intimidation part of authoritarianism is always a part of the playbook.
Rick, the New York Times notes that some experts think that this rhetoric is more symbolic. They're calling it a cold civil war manifested by intractable polarization and mistrust rather than a hot war with conflict. Is that what we're seeing now? Because I got to be honest with you, it already feels uncomfortably hot to me already.
January 6th struck me as a pretty goddamn hot day, despite being in January. This was an example of people who were willing to use violence. And what Stuart Rhodes himself said this week, we should have brought more rifles. These people are ready to go. It doesn't matter that a tiny fraction of them believe this. What matters is that the rest of the Republican establishment doesn't care. They're silent. They will not speak out. They will not denounce them. They will not stand up. When Mitch McConnell is threatened by the former president this weekend, he cowers in fear. he doesn't stand up. They have decided that the cancer inside the party is something they can live with long enough to seize power again, and they hope that the alligator will eat them last, if I may mix my metaphors here. This is a dangerous party with a dangerous belief that power alone justifies any attempt, any excuse, any methodology to get there, and it does not. And it is going to be something where we pay the price as a country and a society unless we strap up and decide we're going to push back against these people. And it's got to happen sooner than later.
Christina, GOP lawmakers like Lindsey Graham have echoed Trump's threats. Take a quick listen.
If they try to prosecute President Trump for mishandling classified information after Hillary Clinton set up a server in her basement, they literally will be riots in the street. I worry about our country.
Christina, is this just more hot air from Lindsey Graham, or is he actually articulating a legitimate issue, a legitimate move that could be done by the GOP?
Well, we know that Lindsey Graham performs for the audience of one, and that's Donald Trump. I mean, he's been trying to stay in Donald Trump's good graces because he knows that Donald Trump turns against members of his own party. As Rick just said, we saw Mitch McConnell. We see Mike Pence still carrying President Trump's water, even though he was threatened on January 6th. And we can't forget, Katie, people died on January 6th. This is not, this isn't something theoretical. This isn't something hypothetical. These are individuals who are being galvanized, not just by Donald Trump, but by several leaders within their party. And they are ready to do certain things, especially when people like Mitch McConnell or like Lindsey Graham and Donald Trump and Marjorie Taylor Greene are essentially egging them on to do so. And so this goes into larger conversations about our Second Amendment, about why it is that we can't seem to get any gun control in this country after so many school shootings, because there's so many Republicans who refuse to ever let go of their guns as well, because they want something like this. And so they want to intimidate people at the polls. They are itching for a fight. And so many Democrats are saying, we have other policy issues on the table. We're actually not into that. But Republican leaders are really, I think they're now afraid of the dragon that they've created. And they're now just in for the ride. They're in for a penny, in for a pound. And so all of the white nationalism, all of the white supremacy, all of the anger and vitriol and refusal to sit down at the table and have a substantive conversation about policy, all of that's out on the table for the Republican Party. And we're in a really dangerous spot. And I definitely don't think that this is a warm or cool Cold War, whatever the New York Times reported.
I think when you have neutered leadership, that's when you get the weak sauce.
It is Thursday, the 6th of October of 2022, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner, the English Bulldog, is our snoozing sous chef. And our daily special is Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. A little bit of jambalaya. A little bit of spice in your life. Oh my, talk about spicy. Hey, pretty neat what OPEC is doing, huh? Yeah, just before the midterms too. You know, you got all these stolen secret documents at Mar-a-Lago, and then OPEC deciding to mess around, with Russia to F up America just before the midterms. Coincidence? I think not. I also keep thinking of that glowing orb that Trump and the Sauds and other leaders of the area had their hands on. And I thought, yeah, New World Order, huh? No wonder. No wonder they turn that around on us and say it's George Soros. Oh, yeah, well, George Soros isn't putting his hand on any kind of glowing orb representing the world and saying, this is our domain. Yeah. And then, when they looked upon the vastness of their domain, they wept, because there were no more worlds to conquer. Okay. You know, watching the movies will teach you a lot about life. It can. So, we got that going for us. Yeah. And I saw that there's a poll. The polls come out and say that inflation is the number one concern. But I guess there's some heartening news, if you call it heartening. almost 30% believe, which is the second position of what's important in terms of the midterms. First, inflation. And then saving democracy, number 2. And then number 3 is abortion. So I think abortion and saving democracy could be grouped together as far as I'm concerned. But that's quite a stunning poll then. And when saving democracy is number 2, we might insist it be number 1, but I'm astounded it's at least number 2. I mean, it's important enough for people to list it as important on their reason to vote. Well, good. You would think that democracy doesn't need any saving because it's, I don't know, a self-fulfilling prophecy, we would hope. Apparently not. Because since the beginning of this great nation, there's been elements trying to bring it down because they just cannot figure out how to make money without enslaving people. Our overhead will be too high if we give them freedom. Oh, really? I don't know. And then they say, oh, yeah, the unions are commie. The unions are commie. Yeah. You know, fair wages for fair work. Hey, what's wrong with that? Is that supposed to be commie? Jesus, even bees get taken care of better than we take care of our own. And a lot of them are just drones, literally. Okay. As far as we know, their social structure may be a little bit even more complex than we give it credit for. We don't really know about their interpersonal relationships. All we see is a dance. Yep. Okay. I don't know where we're going with it, but I don't know. Mass societies do what they do, and apparently we're one of those mass societies as well. So, all right, more at the pump. Oh, what was OPEC's reason for cutting production? Yeah. To jack up the price, as if the price isn't jacked up enough already. I call that gouging. And they threw in their lot with Russia. Now, it must be understood that Russia is part of OPEC, so let's not kid ourselves here. Okay? Yep. I don't know how that worked out, but it did. And how Russia has a seat on the Security Council, I have no idea, because they are not the Soviet Union. They're only just a fraction of what the Soviet Union used to be. And why are they at the table? I'll tell you why. Nukes. Yep. We hadn't secured their nukes yet. And now we don't have any secure of their nukes now. We have not put any of them in any kind of... Well, we will know when they launch. Apparently we'll know when they're setting up, but... What do? Watch them set up. That's what you do. All right. Well, I suppose, there's so much news going on, with Trump and the Supreme Court and the 11th Circuit and Clarence Thomas. And, oh, my God, I had to put myself in a bubble for 2 reasons. Actually, my sister and her husband are leaving today. And, sometimes, these outside influences of the real world impinge upon this little concern. But this little concern here is, a small bulwark against the fascist uprising, trying to destroy America, and we won't have it. But, so my sister and her husband are leaving to get back to where they live after a visit from over the weekend until now, and that's been grand. Haven't seen them for a considerable time. And I had to put myself in a bubble because you can only take in so much news before you go, okay, that's enough. I'll report on what I got. And what do we have? Well, I'll tell you, this is actually pretty frightening, I suppose. That comprehensive report by the Times found a whopping 3,000% increase in violent Civil War online rhetoric just before the midterms. Yeah. And then the same maggots are whining that there's no parity in the election workers because they're supposed to be even between Democrats and Republicans, and there's more Democrats doing it. Well, I don't know. Why is that? Are you going down there to try to be an election worker? Do you qualify? Maybe you don't qualify. Oh, they have to qualify for everything because, know nothings, know everything about nothing. On the rest of the menu, this next story is a bit grating. I have to tell you, a motorcade taking Vice President Harris to work was in a one-car accident, but agents misled the Secret Service director on the true nature of the incident. It seems like a minor sort of thing, but what the hell? They're always covering up their mistakes. All right. A former Uber security chief has been convicted of covering up a 2016 data breach, and the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals has put dreamers' lives in limbo. They just won't give up on those kids. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where the Mexican government plans to bring another lawsuit against U.S. companies responsible for the flow of illegal weapons into Mexico. And the head of the European Union's executive arm vowed to stress test key EU infrastructure after the sabotage of natural gas pipelines in the Baltic Sea. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by the Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. To the left of the chat room link at our homepage at netrootsradio.com is the link to our Patreon page, and if you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, it would really help us. And well, how would that help us? Well, I'll tell you, it helps us pay our bills. And we thank those who have been so generous over these many years, 11 plus to be exact. And what have they done? Well, I'll tell you what they've done and what you might do if you aren't already. And that is, if you could afford an espresso-type coffee drink and send us those funds once a month, we're able to pool those dollars and put a big dent in the ever-increasing bills that, our service provider, everybody, even the data people. Jeez. Anyway, thank you for your generosity. It really has helped us fulfill our civic duty as the founders originally intended so many years ago. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, do so at Netroots Radio, and Tom takes care of that, and we thank Tom for doing so. And thank you, Tom. Follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam. I incidentally post the show notes and links diary on Daily Co's 10 minutes before showtime. So if you want to read the complete article by the reporters doing the reportage, you can find that by looking at my Twitter feed, and then you can go find that at the on my Daily Co's page there, where the show notes and links of the shows are always there. Always. So far. If you would like to follow the show on Twitter, do so at Cookbook West, and pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, etc., etc., etc. Sometimes we have fun here, okay? Sometimes. All right, let us tuck into this first offering here in the salon that we call West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. And we are, of course, in the Bistro Cafe part of such establishment. And the chef's table is, back there where the chef likes to hang out. But this chef is right here in the Bistro Cafe. All right. This is somewhat of a disturbing story when you look at it from, the 3,000-foot level. But the great Carol D. Leonnig of the Washington Post brings us this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. A motorcade taking Vice President Harris to work was in a one-car accident on a closed roadway in D.C. on Monday morning, an incident that concerned both the Secret Service director and the vice president, and revived worries about the agency's history of concealing its mistakes. The Secret Service agent driving Harris in an SUV struck the curb of a downtown tunnel hard enough that the vehicle's tire needed to be replaced, bringing the motorcade to a standstill near Foggy Bottom at about 10:20 a.m. Harris had to be transferred to another vehicle in the motorcade so agents could safely spirit her to the White House. The routine nature of the travel and the high level of training required for agents who drive the president and vice president led many in the Secret Service, as well as Harris, to question how such an accident could happen. The Secret Service also failed to note key details of the incident in an electronic message formally alerting senior leadership to the motorcade's delay. The agency's Protective Intelligence Division reported that a, quote, mechanical failure, end quote, in the lead car had forced agents to transfer Harris to another vehicle during a scheduled movement to the White House. By Monday afternoon, Secret Service Director Kim Cheadle received information from other agents that the alert did not accurately convey what happened. In fact, many other Secret Service agents on Harris's detail and at the White House, as well as Harris, knew her driver had actually hit the side pavement of a tunnel. A spokeswoman for the vice president said Harris is grateful for all the Secret Service does to keep her safe, and I suppose why wouldn't she? The vice president sustained no injuries and appreciates the quick response by her USSS detail to get her to the White House safely, Kirsten Allen said in an emailed statement. Secret Service spokesman Anthony Guglielmi said the driver overcorrected when steering, leading to the accident. He said Harris was unharmed and delivered safely to the White House. He said agents did not initially share full details of what caused the problem in the vice president's motorcade in the formal written alert, but later briefed their superiors in person. Joseph Menn of the Washington Post brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. A former chief executive officer for Uber was convicted yesterday, Wednesday, of federal charges stemming from payments he quietly authorized to hackers who breached the ride-hailing company in 2016. Joe Sullivan was found guilty of obstructing justice for keeping the breach from the Federal Trade Commission, which had been probing Uber's privacy protections at the time, and of actively hiding a felony. The verdict ended a dramatic case that pitted Sullivan, a prominent security expert who was an early prosecutor of cybercrimes for the San Francisco U.S. Attorney's Office, against his former government office. In between prosecuting hackers and being prosecuted, Sullivan served as the top security executive at Facebook, Uber, and Cloudflare. Judge William H. Orrick did not set a date for sentencing. Sullivan may appeal if post-trial motions fail to set the verdict aside. Mr. Sullivan's sole focus in this incident and throughout his distinguished career has been ensuring the safety of people's personal data on the Internet, Sullivan attorney David Angeli said after the 12-member jury rendered its unanimous verdict on the fourth day of deliberations. Even without Sullivan's job history, the trial would have been closely watched as the first major criminal case brought against a corporate executive over a breach by outsiders. It also may be one of the last. In the 5 years since Sullivan was fired, payoffs to extortionists, including those who steal sensitive data, have become so routine that some security firms and insurance companies specialize in handling the transactions. Paying out the ransom, I think, is more common than we're led to believe. There is an attitude that's similar to a fender bender, said Michael Hamilton, a founder of security firm Critical Insight. FBI leaders, while officially discouraging the practice, have said they will not pursue the people and companies that pay ransoms if they don't violate sanctions prohibiting payments to named criminal groups, especially close to the Russian government. Most security professionals had been anticipating Sullivan's acquittal, noting that he had kept the CEO and others who were not charged informed of what was happening. Personal liability for corporate decisions with executive stakeholder input is a new territory that's somewhat uncharted for security executives, said David Shackelford, owner of Voodoo Security. I fear it will lead to a lack of interest in our field and increased skepticism about InfoSec overall. John Johnson, a virtual chief information security officer for multiple companies, agreed. Your company leadership could make choices that can have very personal repercussions to you and your lifestyle, he said. Not saying everything Joe did was right or perfect, but we can't bury our head and say it will never happen to us. Prosecutors argued in Sullivan's case that his use of a non-disclosure agreement with the hackers was evidence that he participated in a cover-up. They said the break-ins was a hack that was followed by extortion as the hackers threatened to publish the data they took, and so it should not have qualified for Uber's bug bounty program to reward friendly security researchers. But the reality is that as the hacking of corporations has gotten worse, the way companies have dealt with it has moved far past the letter of the law when Sullivan was accused of breaking it. Kevin McGill of the Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. A federal appeals court yesterday, Wednesday, ordered a lower court review of Biden administration revisions to a program preventing the deportation of hundreds of thousands of immigrants brought to the United States as children. The Fifth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals said a federal district judge in Texas should take another look at the program following the revisions adopted in August. The ruling leaves the future of deferred action for children arrivals up in the air, with current DACA recipients protected for now, but new applicants barred. President Joe Biden said in a statement that he was disappointed in the ruling, noting the court stay provides a temporary reprieve for DACA recipients, but one thing remains clear: the lives of dreamers remain in limbo. People protected by DACA are commonly referred to as dreamers based on never-passed proposals in Congress called the DREAM Act. The president added, and while we use the tools we have to allow dreamers to live and work in the only country they know as home, it is long past time for Congress to pass permanent protections for dreamers, including a pathway to citizenship. And that's how it should be, and why? Because that's why we are America. All right, let's get to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
Make sure you're registered to vote. Go to rockthevote.org. Vote for Democrats up and down the ticket. This message, a public service from all the fine people of netrootsradio.com.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Fiona Samuels. The red wolf once roamed a huge swath of the eastern United States. The historic range of these rust-colored canines stretched from Long Island across to Missouri and down to the Texas-Mexico border. But by 1972, the population was reduced to only roaming a small area along the Gulf Coast due to habitat loss and hunting. To conserve the species, 14 individuals were captured as part of a breeding program. In 1980, their wild relatives were declared extinct. The captured wolves were all that was left.
The species has gone through this huge bottleneck, and through that lost a lot of genetic variation. And now there's a fair amount of inbreeding in the species because you can't help it when you have so few founders.
That's Kristen Bresky, an assistant professor at Michigan Technological University whose research focuses on the conservation of genetics of wild animal populations.
I think what captures the imagination with the red wolf, and I think this work, is it's been the underdog. It's been the underdog scientifically. It's been the underdog for conservation. It was, all wolves were heavily persecuted, but the red wolves were heavily persecuted to the point that only 14 were left.
Now, Bresky and her collaborators have found a surprising new pool of red wolf genes that might help bring more diversity to the tiny population. Ghost alleles in wild coyote populations. Alleles are the parts of chromosomes that encode specific genetic traits. Just like humans, canines inherit one allele from each parent for a certain gene. But why are these called ghost alleles?
So the ghost part is the red wolves are gone, and we presumed they took all of their genes with them. But what we also have to remember is when a population is dying out, it might find the best mate is the next closest related species. So a red wolf and a coyote can have offspring. Maybe the red wolf dies because that's what's been happening for red wolves. But all of those genes that it just passed on to its coyote hybrid offspring now get to circulate, and we've rediscovered those.
Bridget Von Holt, who you just heard, is a collaborator working with Bresky. Together, they found that some coyote populations in Louisiana and Texas who were protected from hunting still retain huge amounts of red wolf genes. Some individuals are almost 60% wolf. As red wolves are released back into the wild, breeding with these coyotes could help the critically endangered species regain some of its genetic diversity. That's almost like going back in time and undoing the genetic bottleneck from 1980, making the new red wolf population more genetically diverse.
This would be kind of the opposite direction, taking the small, isolated, inbred population from the captive breeding program, but still has red wolf genes that are so critical, and put them into a wild landscape with new genetic variation that they haven't seen for 50 years or more. And all of a sudden, hopefully this is like a super mix of genetic health and sort of a rebound that these animals can be wild and be themselves again.
The next steps will include how to release red wolves in a way that takes advantage of the ghost alleles hiding in the coyote populations. Like with other wolf releasing efforts, there might be some pushback.
There will be controversy. There will be people who aren't happy, but there are people that are and are incredibly supportive. And I think also at the end of the day, there's a philosophy that we created this problem. We're responsible for fixing it.
For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Fiona Samuels.
This is a message from CDC.
After hurricanes, tornadoes, and floods, standing water and excess moisture help mold grow in your home, garage, and other structures. When you return to a home that has been flooded, know that you're likely to have mold. Mold puts your family's health at risk. If you have mold growing in your home, you should clean it up and fix other water problems, such as leaks in roofs, walls, or plumbing. Keep your children and pets out of affected areas until you've cleaned. Control moisture in your home to prevent mold growth. To remove mold growth from hard surfaces, use commercial products, soap and water, or a bleach solution of no more than 1 cup of household laundry bleach in 1 gallon of water. Follow the manufacturer's instructions. Never mix bleach with ammonia or other household cleaners. It will produce dangerous, toxic fumes. Open windows and doors to provide fresh air.
For more information, visit cdc.gov or call 1-800-CDC-INFO.
This is an important message from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. After a storm or disaster, it's important to eat only safe food. Throw away perishables like meat, poultry, fish, eggs, and leftovers stored above 40 degrees Fahrenheit for 2 hours or more. Throw away food with an unusual odor, color, or texture. Throw away food that may have come in contact with floodwater, including food in swollen, punctured, and damaged cans. When in doubt, throw it out.
This program is presented by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
Welcome to A Cup of Health with CDC, a weekly feature of the MMWR, the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report. I'm Dr. Jeffrey Nemhauser, filling in for your host, Dr. Kathleen Dooling. As the U.S. population ages, more people are at risk for injuries. The largest percentage of injury-related deaths among this group are caused by falls. Elizabeth Burns is with CDC's National Center for Injury Prevention and Control. She's joining us today to discuss ways to prevent injuries and deaths from falls among senior adults. Welcome to the show, Elizabeth.
Thanks for having me.
Elizabeth, what are some of the more common consequences when a senior adult falls?
Well, first, it's important to note that falls are incredibly common. More than 1 in 4 older adults will fall in a given year. Common consequences include loss of independence and an increased fear of falling, as older adults are afraid to do the same kinds of activities they were doing before. And this can actually lead to more falls, as older adults have less strength in their lower body. Common consequences include hip fracture and traumatic brain injury. And ultimately, in 2016, almost 30,000 older adults died because of a fall.
So are falls more common in men or in women?
Falls are more common in women, and more women go to the emergency department because of a fall, and more women die because of a fall. However, the rate of fall deaths are more common in men than women. What this means is that out of 100,000 men, more will die from a fall than out of 100,000 women.
What are common causes of falls among older people?
Getting on and off the toilet and getting in and out of bed are common causes of falls. Walking around the hallways at night when the lights are off is a common way people fall. There's also an increased amount of medications used in seniors, which have side effects like making them lightheaded, and that increases the risk of falls and is a common cause.
With all of those factors, what are some ways our listeners can decrease their chances of falling?
Older adults should talk to their healthcare provider or doctor about how they can decrease their chances of falling. This can be done during the annual wellness visit or during annual physicals. The doctor will recommend an exercise program that should increase strength and balance or maybe refer you to a physical therapist. Additionally, they can look through your medications and perhaps reduce your doses or suggest medications that decrease your chances of falls.
Are there things we can do to modify our homes to prevent falling?
Oh, absolutely. Installing grab bars on the side of the toilet, making sure that rugs are taped down or removed, making sure that there's lighting in the hallways are all really simple ways that an older adult can modify their home to prevent falls.
Where can listeners go to get more information about preventing falls?
Listeners can go to cdc.gov/study, and that's spelled STEADI.
Thanks, Elizabeth. I've been talking today with Elizabeth Burns about ways to prevent fall-related injuries and deaths among senior adults. Improving strength and agility through regular exercise and removing potential obstacles in the home can help decrease the risk for falls. If you or a loved one is older and struggle with mobility, talk with a healthcare provider about ways to decrease the risks for fall-related injuries and death. Until next time, be well. This is Dr. Jeffrey Nemhauser for A Cup of Health with CDC.
For the most accurate health information, visit cdc.gov or call 1-800-CDC-INFO.
Hi, it's Tom. Could we humbly suggest your donation to netrootsradio.com? All we've got to run this 24-hour powerhouse of progressive resistance radio is what comes out of our own wallets. And you are our biggest donor. And it doesn't take much, $3, $5. Just go to the bottom of our netrootsradio.com page and hit our secure donate button. Heck, you can even make a recurring contribution. So donate what you'd like at the bottom of our netrootsradio.com's homepage. Because you are our biggest donor. netrootsradio.com. Together, we are Resistance Radio.
In January 2021, President Trump and his supporters urged Vice President Pence to not count the electoral votes from certain states. Trump argued that Pence could do that, but Pence didn't buy it. But what if he did? I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. Donald Trump's argument was that the vice president could count or not count electoral votes as he saw fit, an argument that runs contrary to law and history. But to clarify the situation, there now is pending in Congress a bill that would make crystal clear that the vice president's role as president of the Senate in counting electoral votes is strictly ceremonial, nothing more. The bill also, crucially, would prevent state officials from submitting electoral college votes that do not reflect the popular vote in that state. The proposed legislation is hardly a panacea for the ills of our voting processes. It does not prevent voter suppression or reinstate the Voting Rights Act or remedy gerrymandering or make the Electoral College more, small d, democratic. And passage is certainly not a done deal. There are very different Senate and House versions of this legislation. Requiring that the Electoral College votes from each state reflect the popular vote and that those electoral votes actually be counted would help stabilize a pillar of presidential elections in the United States, a pillar that was put in grave danger on January 6, 2021. The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because freedom can't protect itself.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1996. 15,000 workers at the General Motors plant in Quebec walked off the job. Members of the Canadian Auto Workers Union were frustrated with their wages. They were also angry about layoffs and General Motors' move to outsource some of the auto production to non-unionized labor. One striker explained, GM doesn't want to have 30-year people anymore. They want temporary workers who they can pay lower wages. The Canadian auto workers had won an agreement with Chrysler that guaranteed the company would not sell off any Canadian parts plants. But GM refused to make a similar promise. During the strike, the union reported that General Motors' $39 billion profit last year was the largest single corporate profit ever recorded in Canadian history. The union argued that much of this profit came from underpaying Canadian workers. Canadians only accounted for 8% of the company's North American workforce, but they generated 42% of GM's total profit on the continent. Soon, GM workers at other Canadian plants joined the strike, which swelled to 26,000 workers. As the strike wore on, its impact was felt beyond the Canadian borders. Thousands of GM workers in the United States were temporarily laid off. The parts they built were not needed because of the strike in Canada. It is estimated that 90,000 cars were not produced because of the strike. Finally, after nearly 3 weeks, the union and the company reached an agreement. The workers won a 2% annual raise in addition to their cost of living increase, but they also agreed that GM could sell off 2 of its plants and allow GM the right to do more outsourcing of parts from outside suppliers. And for that, the workers at those plants were guaranteed their wage level for 3 years. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Metro Shrimp and Grist Thursdays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River, in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon, on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 58 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting a high of about 90 to 92 degrees Fahrenheit, a bit warmer than yesterday, they say. Sunny throughout the day, and winds will be light and variable. A few clouds overnight with winds light and variable. Lows will be in the mid-50s, with sunny skies tomorrow, highs about the same. Winds light and variable. Ragweed pollen is the pollen of choice. Actually, it's the one that's rated the highest, which is rated high, and that's the predominant weed that is causing problems for those of us who have problems. The air quality index for the region, though, is in the good range still, though it has ticked up a bit at 45 parts per million, and that daytime UV index is at its fall moderate range at level 4. Barometric pressure is rising at 30.09 inches. Visibility is at 7 miles. And relative humidity is at 100%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. London is 65 degrees and partly cloudy. Paris is 68 and sunny. Rome is 78 and fair. Kyiv is 64 and sunny. Kabul is 56 and clear. Hong Kong is 82 degrees and fair. Tokyo is 56 and cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 60 degrees and mostly cloudy. San Francisco, California is 54 and cloudy. And New York, New York is a pleasant 65 degrees Fahrenheit and sunny. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. staff at the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Metro Shrimp and Grist Thursdays. The Mexican government plans to bring another lawsuit against U.S. companies it claims are responsible for the flow of illegal weapons into Mexico, Foreign Affairs Secretary Marcelo Ebrard said on Wednesday yesterday. Ebrard suggested the new lawsuit could target gun shops or dealers in U.S. border states like Arizona, who sell guns to straw purchasers who then pass them on to smugglers who then take the weapons into Mexico. He said about 60% of the weapons seized in Mexico in recent years have been sold in 10 U.S. counties, mostly along the border. Mexico has very strict restrictions on weapons possessions, but drug cartel violence has cost hundreds of thousands of lives in the country in recent years, and guess where they got the guns? Mexico is going to file the second lawsuit in Arizona, and we are going to show that many of these outlets where they sell these products in these counties I mentioned are dealing with straw purchasers and criminal charges have to be brought, Ebrard said in an appearance before the Mexican Senate. A recently enacted U.S. law defines straw purchasing as a crime and sets out sentences of as much as 15 to 25 years if the offense is related to drug trafficking. The announcement comes several days after a U.S. federal judge dismissed Mexico's first lawsuit against U.S. gun manufacturers. Ebrard said Mexico would appeal that decision. The judge ruled Mexico's claims that did not overcome the broad protection provided to gun manufacturers by the Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act passed in 2005. That law shields gun manufacturers from damages resulting from criminal or unlawful use of a firearm. Mexico is seeking at least $10 billion in compensation, but legal experts had viewed the lawsuit as a long shot. The Mexican government estimates that 70% of the weapons trafficked into Mexico come from the U.S. It said that in 2019 alone, at least 17,000 homicides in Mexico were linked to trafficked weapons originating in the United States.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière, la promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle, c'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Even more anonymous worker bees at the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The head of the European Union's executive arm vowed yesterday, Wednesday, to introduce checks on key EU infrastructure, including energy, after the sabotage of natural gas pipelines in the Baltic Sea. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said the damage last week to the Nord Stream pipelines that run from Russia to Germany has, quote, shown how vulnerable our energy infrastructure is, and a comprehensive plan is needed to ensure the safety of key EU networks, including for data. We need to stress test our infrastructure, von der Leyen told the European Parliament in Strasbourg, France. We need to identify whether we have weak points and where these weak points are. She also said that satellite surveillance will be used to detect potential threats. Amid Russia's 7-month war against Ukraine and Western military support for the Ukrainian government, Undersea explosions last week ruptured the Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 pipelines, which were built to carry gas from Russia to Germany. Because member countries are responsible for overseeing energy and other basic infrastructure within the EU, van der Leyen said her safety push would involve national capitals. We will work with member states to ensure effective stress tests in the energy sector, she said. This then should be followed by other high-risk sectors, such as the offshore digital and electricity infrastructure. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day. But you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here tomorrow for Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we will meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair. T'embrasser les yeux ouverts, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.